If you've got a copy of the first edition of Special Makeup Effects for Stage and Screen, you've probably already seen the DVD tutorial for how to make and apply 3D transfers. If not, well, here you go. First of all, how do you pronounce this word? Pros-Aide? Pros-Aide? Is it pros for prosthetic aid or pros for professional aid? Who cares? Either way is fine and everybody will know what you mean. I go back and forth, but I digress. Like most of what's in the second edition of the book, materials and techniques continue to evolve, and I do almost nothing the same way when making 3D transfers, or TPA appliances as they're also known, which stands for Thickened Pros-Aide. So this will be a new and improved lesson in making and applying them. However, one thing is the same. I still use Pros-Aide adhesive from ADM Tronics to make my TPA, also called Bondo, as an homage to the polyester auto body patching material. Graftobian's Pro adhesive is every bit as good as Pros-Aide, I think, and costs about the same. I use them both. Like just about everything in our craft, there's more than one way to do just about everything, and the way I'm showing you here is merely how I do it, though I'm by no means alone in this method. TPA appliances are now commonly used in the industry, and if you don't know how to make and apply them yet, you will by the time this video is over, and then you can try making them on your own. Although you can buy pre-thickened Pros-Aide cream from several sources, I prefer to make my own in my trusty old Sunbeam Mixmaster and color it myself because I usually mix up a fairly large batch and find it much more cost-effective to do it myself. A gallon of Pros-Aide sells for a little over $200, or just over 130 pounds if you're watching this in the UK. There are a couple of ways you can make the TPA. In a mixer, mixing on the slowest speed for several hours, like overnight, until the Pros-Aide thickens naturally as the water evaporates, or by adding Cabasil, a very light fumed silica that's used as a filler and thickening agent, until your Pros-Aides reach the consistency you like. By allowing the water to evaporate naturally through mixing it for a number of hours, there's going to be less shrinkage of the prosthetic, but if time is more important than some negligible shrinkage, and how much the piece will shrink is going to be dependent on the size of the piece to begin with, you may just want to add some Cabasil. Just know that you should wear a dust mask or a respirator if you're using the Cabasil. It's okay to ingest it. It's used as a thickener for ketchup and other foods. But if you breathe it, you run the risk of developing silicosis, something you do not want. If you can, try both methods and decide which you prefer. The more Cabasil you use, the thicker your Bondo, but at the expense of some flexibility. You can add a plasticizer to the mixture for some added softness and flexibility, and I discuss this in some detail in the book. You can leave the Pros-Aide uncolored if you wish and simply paint the appliance after application, or you can add color during the mixing process. There are options here too. Many people use small amounts of PAX paint, which is artist's acrylic, mixed with Pros-Aide, but you can also use flocking or even watercolor or other water-based acrylic paint or pigment. Just know that you don't want to create an opaque appliance. Some translucency is best. Also know that the TPA will dry a shade or two darker than when it's still wet. Typically, the Pros-Aide is frozen in its mold to polymerize it, which gives it properties such as elasticity and tensile strength that it didn't have before. However, you can encapsulate your mold before putting TPA into it, essentially adding what'll be an outer skin, and then just let it air dry, or you can put it in a dehydrator to evaporate the water and dry the appliance. What do you mean you don't have a dehydrator? Once the TPA is ready, it's been mixed long enough so there's minimal water still in it and it's thick and paste-like, it's ready to be placed in a silicone plate mold like one of these. I like to release my molds just to be safe, even though nothing really sticks to silicone except other silicone. Pros-Aide was originally developed as a bumper sticker adhesive, so it's very strong. You ever tried to remove a bumper sticker from your car? I use one of several releases. Epoxy Par Film works really well, as does Freecoat 1711 Spray Release and Mann's Ease Release 200. For this, I'm using Freecoat Lift. First, we'll add some TPA to the released mold. Notice how thin the mold is? It needs to be thin and flexible because when the TPA is frozen in the mold, We will remove the mold from the appliance, not the appliance from the mold. If we wait until the TPA is thawed out, it'll be difficult to separate from the mold. We need to do it while it's still frozen. Once the TPA is in the mold, the excess needs to be squeegeed off before placing a piece of silicone-treated acetate over it, and then squeegeeing it again to get good contact between the acetate sheet and the TPA in the mold. The treated acetate is part of a paired set of acetate and water slide decal transfer paper. You can buy it from Motion Picture FX Company or Friends Beauty Supply in the US and from Mold Life in Europe and the UK. It comes in 20 by 26 inch sheets. The acetate is only treated on one side, so make sure you put the right side against the TPA. How you can tell is by making a small mark with a Sharpie. It'll bead up on the correct side. If you put the untreated side against the TPA, it will not come off when you try to remove it later. I usually don't leave the mold in the freezer more than an hour and a half. It's possible to overfreeze the TPA, resulting in ice crystals that'll alter the appearance of your appliance, essentially ruining it. Now we've time jumped ahead 90 minutes and the TPA is frozen, but the silicone mold is still soft and pliable, so we can remove it without damaging the appliance. Once the TPA is out of the mold, I carefully remove the flashing so the edges remain undisturbed, and then pop it into the dehydrator to dry and get rid of any residual water. If the piece is wet when it's applied, it won't stick properly. If you don't have a dehydrator, you can help the process along with a small blow dryer. Or if you're not in a hurry, just let it dry. TPA appliances can be pre-painted before attaching them to the transfer paper, but it's not necessary. It's just sometimes easier than doing it once they've been applied. I use alcohol-activated palettes from Premier products called Skin Illustrator. Either way, when you're ready to apply the prosthetic, it needs to get from the acetate onto the transfer paper. To do that, a thin layer of straight Pros-Aide adhesive has to be applied to the surface of the appliance right to the edge of the prosthetic, but not onto the acetate. One of the nice things about Pros-Aide is that it goes on white when it's wet, but dries clear and stays very sticky. There is a no-tack version of Pros-Aide, but we want the surface to be sticky. When the Pros-Aide is dry, we'll carefully place the prosthetic down on the shiny side of the transfer paper. Make sure you place it properly because once it touches down, it's not going anywhere. Press firmly along the edges to make sure there's good contact, but not so hard that you damage the prosthetic. Now it's time to remove the acetate so the prosthetic can be applied. If the appliance doesn't want to come off the acetate cleanly, a neat little trick I learned to fix that is to take a can of compressed air, turn it upside down, and spray the stubborn edge. The gas in the air can freezes the TPA momentarily, allowing you to peel off the acetate. Just don't freeze your fingers too. Once the acetate's been removed, trim the transfer paper close to the edge of the appliance, and it's ready to apply. Make sure your model's skin is clean and free of oils or makeup. For extra hold, you can stipple a thin layer of Pros-Aide on the skin where the appliance is going. These things were designed so you could go swimming in them, so it'll probably be fine. With the appliance in place, lightly press a wet paper towel, washcloth, or large puff onto the paper, wetting it thoroughly. Doesn't need to be sopping wet, just damp enough to soak through the transfer paper to release the prosthetic. The shiny surface of the paper is really a very thin cellulose layer that dissolves and releases the appliance from the paper. In about 30 seconds, you can carefully peel away the paper and voila! A perfect, seamless prosthetic application. The removal process is equally easy with just about any remover you'd use to remove any prosthetic glued with Pros-Aide. The final step is always to clean the skin and re-moisturize it. I remember the first time I made a big batch of Bondo and had to clean the residue out of the mixing bowl and off the beaters. I think the profanity that spilled forth is still hanging in space above Colorado where I live. I have since learned 3 things. 1. Acetone turns dried Pros-Aide residue to jelly. Just strain the jelly and acetone through a paint strainer, toss the jelly, and reuse the acetone. 2. I don't like acetone very much. And 3. A thin silicone film coating applied to the stainless steel mixing bowl lets you just peel out the dried Pros-Aide neat and easy. Since Sunbeam does not make a silicone-lined mixing bowl for its line of mixers, at least not for mine, I made it a little do-it-yourself project. I used Smooth-On's Silpoxy one-component tin silicone adhesive. It cures in about 10 minutes, so you're not left with that nauseating vinegar-like smell for very long. I just sponged it into the bowl and onto the beaters in 2 thin layers, and it works like a charm. Learn to work smart, not hard. So, there you have it. Thickened Pros-Aide prosthetic transfers. Enjoy!